It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to...
I'm here at the University of Wolverhampton to talk to Professor Gary Sheffield, Vice President of the Western Front Association, about aspects of the First World War. In this period, just before the anniversary of the First World War, Gary, I wonder if you can tell me what educational opportunities you think the Centenary offers to us.
Well, the First World War Centenary offers a literally once in 100 years opportunity for education of the general public, of the media, and dare I say it, even of the government. And I must say, here at the University of Wolverhampton, we're very pleased to be cooperating with the Western Front Association on a number of projects. Our first one I'd mention actually is the Centenary Lecture Series. Very pleased to be able to bring a series of very high-profile speakers to a general audience, particularly aimed at WFA members, because I believe very strongly that academics shouldn't sit in their ivory towers. They should get out there and engage with the mass of people. And of course, there are so many people whose enthusiasm and interest in the war has been fired by the fact we're now 100 years on. Also, I'm very much involved in the launch of our new MA in the history of Britain and the First World War, which we're beginning this September 2014. And I'm really very, very pleased with the quality of what I might call a star-studded lineup of teachers. Professor Peter Simpkins, the WFA president, another vice president, Dr. John Bourne, other WFA stalwarts such as Professor Stephen Badsey, Dr. Spencer Jones. And again, this is a fantastic chance for us to bring scholarship to a wider audience. Because for so long I've been frustrated about you have the same old myths being regurgitated time after time. And this is a chance for people who have an interest in the First World War to go deeper, to find out what really went on, to engage with the debates. And I really hope at the end of this period of 5 years of Centenary coming up, we will have, if nothing else, a much better informed debate right across the UK.
And these MA programmes will be available also, obviously, to Western Front Association members to participate in.
Absolutely. Well, we already have quite a good uptake from WFA members, and I'm hoping to see many more. Because so many people in the WFA, and I go around a number of branches, have such deep specialism in a particular area, and a lot of them are actually very keen to put in a wider context. And I must say, some of the students I teach know far more about a particular subject than I do. But when you tell them, well, actually, have you looked at this book or thought about this idea? It's very important in providing context. And yeah, and I'm really looking forward to a very good partnership between the WFA and the University of Wolverhampton over the period of the Centenary and, of course, beyond that. This joint lecture series that we're running with the WFA, and we've got some big names lined up. Dr. Adrian Gregory of University of Oxford, Professor Mike Nyberg of the US Army War College, Professor Brian Bond. They're three who've agreed to come, and I've got some big names coming in the future.
Do you feel that there's any particular areas of study that need to be looked at by undergraduates or indeed by PhD students in this period?
Well, the more I look at the First World War, the more it strikes me actually how little we know about it. You might think that everything has been covered, really it hasn't. Even some of the really big topics, like generalship, for example, there's always a new area to look at. And one of the things which I've been particularly encouraged about over the last few years is the way that the First World War is being seen as a total war for Britain. By that I mean actually it is a war that involves every segment of society, and there's some fascinating research has been done into local communities, individual soldiers, the impact on different communities, and there's so much scope to carry on doing yet more of that. We need a vast number of local studies if we're going to get a true picture of what was happening in Britain as a whole. And I must say the acquisition by the WFA of, I think it's 6 million pension records, that is such a hugely important resource. And obviously it's going to be of use for people researching individual soldiers, but actually it opens all sorts of avenues of research for those who want to look at broader patterns of recruitment, of health, of age, and all sorts of matters. And certainly there's plenty of scope for research at all sorts of levels. I'm very fortunate in my day job here at the University of Wolverhampton is that I engage with some very good research at all sorts of levels, ranging from some excellent undergraduate dissertations as part of their degree in various aspects of the First World War through a terrific range of master students, right up to the top level with people doing some very important PhD work. So there is such great scope for research, and of course people don't actually have to come to university to do it. There's all sorts of other avenues where people can carry out some really serious research. And people quite often ask me, where can they go to find out local records? And the short answer is, well, usually the local county record office or the local regimental archive will have something, but start with local newspapers. Particularly for the First World War, newspapers are remarkably uncensored and all sorts of fascinating material can be found there. So anybody who wants to do a research topic, there's an awful lot of things to do and a lot of material to work on.
Obviously, with the Western Front Association having a certain amount of money available to support PhD students, that fits in quite nicely with that particular aspiration.
It does, and I must say, I think it's a really very, very welcome move on the part of the WFA, which I think helps to fulfil our educational purpose.
Some people have accused the media of recycling a lot of the myths about the First World War. What do you think about this?
I'm afraid I would tend to agree with that view. It's quite dispiriting in some ways that historians have spent good many years demolishing myths, only to find them being recycled in allegedly reputable news outlets. One which has caused particular annoyance recently is the announcement by the FA, I believe with government backing, there's to be a centenary football match to mark the Christmas truce of 1914. The problem with that is there's almost no evidence that a football match took place. There may have been a kick around, but certainly the impression seems to be in some quarters it was a full-scale international 11-a-side on a marked-out pitch in no man's land, which of course is just complete nonsense. And getting beyond those myths, I think, is an incredibly important role for historians in general, and I'd say the Western Front Association in particular, over the next 5 years. Because it's, I think, for us to politely but firmly point out when people come up with silly things, what the facts are. Now, I'm well aware that some matters, for example, the generalship of Douglas Haig, is a matter of interpretation such as rather than fact, but at the very least, we can pull up people who, for example, grossly exaggerate the number of killed on the first day on the Somme, which in fact the Prime Minister did in his announcement back in 2012 of the government's centenary programme. Now, gosh, we know the casualties on the 1st of July were bad enough, but to inflate them massively as he did is really not very helpful from an educational point of view. I do feel that the WFA should not be pushing any particular line beyond the fact that we need to be aware that there are some basic facts which some people get wrong, and if people put forward controversial interpretations, one way or the other, I think the Western Front Association, or at least members of the Western Front Association, ought to be prepared to say there is another view. And the generalship of the First World War, which I suspect we're going to hear an awful lot about in 2016, over the anniversary of the Somme, the centenary of the Somme, I think is going to be a case in point, because too often we see the lions led by donkeys view of generalship trotted out without any real attempt to place it into a wider context. Now again, the casualties were horrendous. No one pretends that they were otherwise, but there's a much bigger backstory to why the casualties were so heavy and what actually those casualties achieved. And at the moment, I'm afraid we're seeing an awful lot of repetition of myths, almost as though the likes of John Terraine had never written in the first place, which I think is a great shame.
There has been a great deal of media coverage in the first half of 2014. Some of the quality of this has been patchy. Have you got any particular views on the quality and quantity of the media coverage so far?
I think there's frankly been far too much of it. I must confess I've been quite surprised by the sheer volume of coverage, and of course it started well before 2014. It started at least a year ago. I was one of, in fact, a number of historians who were consulted by the BBC for my views on their programming a year or so ago. And I must say my view was that they should go for a smaller number of very high quality programs, and I fear that the BBC's product has been rather patchy. I found Jeremy Paxman's program particularly disappointing. There was nothing particularly wrong with it apart from there were a few factual errors and things which I know that the historical advisor wasn't very happy let slip through. But also it strikes me to be so devoid of ambition. The coverage on Radio 4, Michael Portillo's series of programmes, I thought was much, much better. I also think there is a real danger of First World War fatigue setting in by the end of the year, because simply there is so much of it. And with the best will in the world, I think people can get bored with the subject, no matter how fascinating it is. And of course, WFA find the First World War incredibly fascinating, but someone coming from outside, I think might be quite bored with it. I think that's a shame, because by placing so much emphasis on 2014, I think the media, BBC, perhaps even to some extent the government, have actually done a disservice, because there's actually 5 years of anniversaries going out to 2018, and there's an awful lot of interesting stuff which I fear might not get the attention it deserves, because people get simply so tired of it in the first year. And so certainly the idea that at the moment we're debating not simply the origins of the First World War, and I must say I've been quite surprised how that has re-emerged as being a very topical subject, but some of the bigger issues, should Britain have gone to war, the generalship, the legacy of the war, I'm a bit afraid we're putting all our eggs in one basket, and I must say I would prefer it to be spread out rather more evenly over the next few years.
Obviously the Western Front Association has been around since 1980, but we're coming up to a very important period. What are your hopes and expectations regarding the Western Front Association in this centenary period?
Well, I wasn't an original member of the WFA, but I joined at a relatively early stage, I think in 1984 or 1985, so I've been a member for quite a long time. And I must say I have been very impressed with the way that the association has grown and developed. Of course, at the time, it was almost as a custodian of the memories of the veterans of the First World War. Of course, there were a number still around. I well remember going to possibly my first ever WFA meeting, and Charles Carrington and Norman Gladden, both of whom have written, I regard as classic memoirs of the Western Front, were present. And I got the opportunity to sit and talk, particularly to Charles Carrington, a conversation which I still treasure to this day. And I must say, I regard it as a very great honour when a few years ago I was asked to become a vice president of the WFA, as a greater mark of whatever I've achieved in academia as anything else. Frankly, it was a degree of recognition which I really appreciated. I think the WFA now is at a crossroads. It has done very, very well. I think actually now is the opportunity to take it up to the next level. I'm particularly keen to recruit not merely lots of new members, which I think would be a good thing to do, but particularly younger members. I think this is our opportunity to get the people whose enthusiasm is being fired by, whether it's watching television programs on the First World War, projects at school or university. Now this is our opportunity to bring them into the WFA fold and hopefully make it a lifetime commitment. And I must say, I think the WFA's commitment to education in various forms, I think, is exemplary. I know I've been really pleased that that's happened. Also practical things, of course, preserving and making progress with the Butte de Valencourt on the Somme is incredibly important. You've already mentioned the funding, partial funding for PhDs. All this is incredibly important. I also think the WFA has a significant role to play as a pressure group to keep those whose hands are on the levers of power aware that there are people in the country who care passionately about the way that we remember, the way that we commemorate the First World War, that simply recycling myths is not good enough. And one thing I think we do have an important role to play, and we've already had some result to some extent, is actually putting, in the nicest possible way, pressure on the government to properly commemorate the great victories of 1918. I must say, along with a number of other historians, more generally WFA members, were very disappointed when the government announced their programme of commemorative events to find that whereas the Somme was being commemorated and various other battles, the 100 Days wasn't. Our president, Peter Simpkins, said something along the lines of, it's like commemorating the Second World War by remembering Dunkirk but not D-Day. And I must say, the army in particular and the government have been responsive to the pressure that the WFA and other bodies have been bringing to bear, and I'm very hopeful there will be some proper commemoration of those events of 1918 in 2018 as thoroughly as we are going to mark, for example, the Somme in July 2016. It's always struck me as being a great historical injustice that we remember what happened in 1916 and 1917. We don't remember what happened in 1918. And I hope there is the opportunity of which we in the WFA will play a part to do something to put that historical injustice right. Another important role of the WFA, I think, is in providing Stand 2, which is a fantastic resource for anyone interested in the First World War, and the First World War bumper edition to mark the centenary, I think, is going to be a particularly fine piece of work. And also the website. I must say I'm a relatively recent convert to new media, and it's been a real revelation to me what is available out there, and it strikes me that the WFA website is among the very best military history First World War websites I have seen. It's a wonderful resource, and I'm particularly impressed by the fact that there are, for example, video casts of lectures. So this actually is fulfilling the WFA's educational remit by making material available to be accessible to anybody. I mean, I would always say if you can get to a lecture, you really ought to do so, not least because I think being there and having the opportunity to ask questions of the lecturer in person is important. But the next best thing actually is to watch a video cast. And so I must say, I think the website is being very, very, is actually, I've built it up to a really, really useful resource for people, like me running master's courses, students taking various courses, or people who just have an interest in going a little further. And I think our real audience, apart from the young people that I've already mentioned, that we ought to be trying to attract to WFA, are people who have had their interest whetted by all the stuff going on about the First World War, but think there's something a bit more to it than this, surely. And I think this gives us the opportunity to go a stage further. And my hope is that at the end of these 5 years of commemoration, the WFA, well, I'm not going to put a figure on the number of people I'd like us to see as members, but we'll be in an even more healthy situation to go forward into the post-centenary era. Because things will be different after 2018. In many ways, I think military historians in general, but the WFA as well, have been building up to the centenary for a number of years. And there will be a bit of taking stock and wondering where we're going next. I hope, in fact I suspect, we're going to be in a very strong position in 2018 to take on the next series of objectives.
Molly wrote a neat reply to Irish Paddy O, saying Mike Maloney wants to marry me, and so leave the Strand and Piccadilly, or you'll be to blame. For love has fairly drove me silly, hoping you're the same. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary.